A fragile Omega locked away behind gilded walls prays for freedom, never knowing an alpha's arrival will shatter every chain his family wrapped around him. But in a house where silence means survival, will love be enough to risk it all? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping BL Omegaverse stories. The walls of the Harrington estate rose like sentinels against the outside world, high and gray, ivy creeping across their surface as though nature itself tried to break through the stone. Inside those walls lay a house far too lavish for its purpose, a house that glittered with chandeliers, polished marble, and fine curtains, yet suffocated with silence. Behind one locked door on the second floor lived Ellior Harrington, the Omega who was caged. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, fingers curled into the sheets as his eyes lingered on the window. It was barred. Not with iron. No, his parents were clever enough to disguise cruelty under civility, but the panes were fitted with reinforced glass, unbreakable. He could see the garden below, the stretch of green hedges, the roses that bloomed defiantly, but he could never touch them. Ellior was 22, though he felt older, worn down by years of confinement. His skin was pale, almost translucent, from lack of sunlight. His dark hair fell in soft waves to his jaw, untamed because no one cared enough to cut it properly, and his eyes, once bright with childish wonder, had dulled into storm-gray shadows. His build was slender, fragile even, as though his body itself mirrored the truth of his existence. A bird with wings clipped, trained to sing only when commanded. The silence of the room pressed on him, broken only by the ticking of a clock mounted above the dresser. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time passed, yet nothing changed. A soft creak echoed beyond the door. Ellior's breath hitched, his shoulders stiffening. He turned his gaze away from the window, pressing his hands tightly into his lap. When the door opened, the tall figure of his mother entered, her perfume flooding the room before she even spoke. "Ellior," Lady Harrington said, her tone smooth, laced with false warmth. "You should be grateful. Tonight we have important guests. Men of wealth, power, and position. One of them could be your salvation." Salvation. The word felt like ash in his mouth. He kept his gaze lowered, knowing better than to meet her eyes. Speaking was unnecessary, silence pleased her more than any words he could say. She stepped closer, her fingers catching his chin, forcing him to look at her. Her face was sharp, beautiful in a cruel way, and her eyes glittered with ambition rather than affection. "Do not embarrass us. Do you understand?" Ellior nodded, his throat tight. She smiled, satisfied, and released him. "Good boy. Dress properly. You may even catch their interest tonight." With that, she turned, her heels clicking against the polished floor before the door shut again, locking him back into solitude. His chest ached. It wasn't the first time she had paraded him before strangers, dressed him up like a prize to be displayed, whispered his supposed worth into the ears of men who saw Omegas as possessions. Each time, Ellior prayed none of them would choose him. He prayed, though he did not know what mercy looked like anymore. When dusk arrived, the servants came to prepare him. They dressed him in fine clothes, a silk shirt, fitted trousers, polished shoes. They combed his hair until it gleamed, applied powder to hide the faint bruises that lingered on his wrists, remnants of his father's grip when Ellior had once begged too loudly to be let outside. By the time they were finished, he looked polished, untouchable, like a doll placed in a glass case. But the hollowness in his eyes betrayed the truth. The dining hall glowed with golden chandeliers, long tables draped in white, silverware shining beneath candlelight. The guests were already gathered, men in suits, their voices deep, laughter booming, the smell of alcohol sharp in the air. Ellior was led inside, his steps hesitant but controlled, his head lowered as instructed. "There he is," Lord Harrington announced proudly, gesturing toward Ellior. "My son. A fine Omega, untouched, unspoiled. A treasure for any who see his value." Ellior's stomach twisted at the words. He stood still, his hands clasped in front of him, the way he had been taught. Do not speak. Do not meet their eyes. Do not resist. He was not a person here, he was a commodity. The men's gazes lingered on him, some calculating, others lecherous. He felt them like chains tightening around his chest. His ears burned with shame, though he had done nothing to deserve it. One man leaned toward his father. "What are you asking for him?" Another laughed. "He looks too fragile. Can he even bear properly?" Their voices blurred together, cold and transactional, as if he were livestock. Ellior's breath caught, and he forced himself to retreat inward, to hide in the small space within his mind where their words could not reach him. He remembered being younger, running once in the garden before they locked the gates, laughing as butterflies darted among the roses. His mother's hand had caught him, nails digging into his skin, her voice a hiss. You are not meant to be seen. Omegas like you are to be cherished, hidden, and saved until the right moment. Do not shame us again. Since then the cage had closed. Now, as the men's voices swirled, he wondered if freedom was something he had only imagined. The night dragged on. Food was served, laughter echoed, wine spilled. Elier stood by his father's side like a statue, forced to endure their gazes, their comments. Once, a hand reached out, bold, fingers brushing his arm as though testing the softness of his skin. He flinched before he could stop himself, earning a sharp look from his father. When the final guest left and silence returned, Elier thought he might be released to his room. Instead, his father gripped his shoulder, his fingers bruising. You will behave better next time, he hissed, anger flickering in his eyes. Do not shame us again. Elier swallowed hard, nodding quickly. He wanted to speak, to beg, to cry, but his voice had long since been stolen by fear. Silence was safer. Silence was survival. Back in his room he sat on the bed, his chest heavy with exhaustion. He pressed his palms against the window pane, the cool glass against his skin a small comfort. Beyond, the moon hung bright and full, bathing the garden in silver light. He whispered then, so softly he wasn't sure if the words were real or imagined. Please, someone. Let me out. His voice trembled in the air, fragile, a secret only the moon could hear. For years no answer had ever come. But tonight, as the shadows stretched across the garden, a carriage rolled through the gates. Elier didn't see it. He only felt the faint tremor of wheels against stone, the echo of hooves. Change was coming. The Omega who was caged did not yet know it, but beyond the walls of his prison, the Alpha who would set him free had arrived. The Harrington estate was never quiet after a night of guests. Servants rushed about cleaning silverware and sweeping up shards of laughter that had long since lost their shine. Elier sat in his room, his back pressed against the window, listening to the distant clatter of dishes and muffled scolding voices. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt again the press of that stranger's hand against his arm, the weight of eyes that saw him as something less than human. His chest felt raw, his throat sore though he had spoken no words. But as the sun rose over the high walls, something shifted in the air. The usual hum of the estate was broken by the sound of wheels crunching against gravel. Hooves struck stone. A carriage, or perhaps a convoy, had arrived. Elier frowned faintly, pressing his forehead to the cold glass. A black car rolled through the gates, sleek and imposing, flanked by riders in uniform. He couldn't see who sat inside, only that the house stirred into a frenzy the moment the vehicle appeared. Servants straightened their uniforms, maids hurried to polish floors that already gleamed, and his mother's shrill commands cut through the air. Something important was about to happen. The lock on his door clicked. Elier sat straighter, hands curling in his lap as his mother entered, her dress immaculate, her hair pulled tightly into a bun. Stand, she ordered, her eyes scanning him critically. Today you will meet someone far above the men you saw last night. He is not to be displeased, do you understand? Elier nodded quickly, throat too dry to answer. Her lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Good. Do not forget what I told you, silence is your best virtue. You will sit, you will listen, and you will not embarrass me. If you do, her nails brushed his jaw, not lovingly but as a warning. You know the consequences. His stomach twisted, but he nodded again. Silence. Always silence. Minutes later, Elier found himself led into the drawing room. The space was large, filled with tall windows that spilled sunlight across velvet carpets and gilded furniture. Yet the grandeur felt suffocating, the air too heavy to breathe. His father stood near the fireplace, speaking with a man Elier had never seen before. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without needing to raise his voice. His hair was dark, neatly kept, his jaw strong and shadowed with a faint stubble. But it was his eyes that unsettled Elier, steady, sharp, a deep blue that seemed to see through everything at once. An alpha. Not like the leering men from the night before. This one stood still, poised, as though the chaos of the world bent around him but never touched him. Lord Ronan, his father said smoothly, allow me to introduce my son, Elier. The alpha's gaze shifted, settling on him. Elier froze. His instincts screamed at him to lower his head, to make himself smaller, to avoid that piercing gaze. But for the briefest second their eyes met, and Elier felt the air catch in his lungs. There was no hunger in that look. No calculation. No cruelty. Only curiosity. He dropped his gaze immediately, heat rushing to his cheeks. His heart thudded too loudly in his chest. "Elior," his father barked. "Greet Lord Ronan properly." He forced the words past his lips, soft and trembling. Good day, my lord." His voice cracked from disuse, like a rusted instrument forced to play. Silence followed. Elior braced himself for mockery or impatience. Instead, Ronan's voice rumbled low, even. "Good day, Elior." The sound of his name on that deep voice sent an unfamiliar shiver down Elior's spine. The conversation continued around him, his father speaking of contracts, alliances, the value of joining families. Elior stood quietly, hands clasped, trying to will himself invisible. Yet every so often he felt Ronan's gaze drift toward him, steady but not heavy, like the sun's warmth rather than a burning flame. At last his mother spoke, her tone honeyed. "Would you care to sit with Elior for a while, my lord? To better acquaint yourself?" Elior's breath caught. "No, please no." But Ronan nodded once. "Yes, I would like that." He gestured toward a set of chairs by the window. Elior's feet moved woodenly, carrying him to the seat across from the Alpha. He sat stiffly, hands clenched in his lap, his eyes fixed on the floor. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not unkind. Finally Ronan spoke. "You do not like to be here." Elior's head jerked up, startled. His lips parted, but no words came. He dropped his gaze again quickly, fear prickling at the back of his neck. "It is written in your eyes," Ronan continued calmly, as though stating a fact rather than an accusation. "The cage does not suit you." Elior's breath stilled. The word echoed too close, too true. He wanted to answer. To say, "Yes, you are right, I cannot breathe here, I am breaking." But his parents' warning echoed louder. "Silence is your best virtue." His throat closed, trapping the words where they burned. Ronan leaned back slightly, studying him. His voice softened. "Do you speak at all?" Elior hesitated. Slowly he gave a small nod. "Then why not to me?" "Because I am afraid. Because every word could cost me more than silence. Because no one has ever cared to hear them." But the words stayed locked away. He shook his head faintly, eyes blurring. Ronan's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, then shifted away. He did not press, did not demand, did not mock. Instead he changed the subject, asking about small things, the weather, the roses in the garden, whether Elior had a favorite book. At first, Elior could only listen, heart pounding, lips pressed tight. But something in the Alpha's tone, measured, calm, free of judgment, began to chip at his fear. Finally, when Ronan asked quietly, "Do you like the garden here?" the answer slipped out before Elior could stop it. "Yes," he whispered, so softly it might have been the breeze. Ronan's eyes flicked to him, steady and unreadable. But Elior thought he saw the faintest curve of approval at the Alpha's mouth. It was nothing. A single word. Yet for Elior it was everything. His heart ached with the unfamiliar sensation, hope, fragile and trembling like a candle lit in the dark. Their time ended too soon. His father returned, eager to resume discussion of contracts. Elior was dismissed, escorted back to his room. But as the door shut behind him, locking once more, he sat on the bed and pressed his hand to his chest. For the first time in years the silence inside him felt different. Not empty. Not suffocating. Somewhere beyond the walls of his cage, there was someone who had looked at him and seen more than an object. Someone who had spoken to him, not at him. And when he whispered into the darkness that night, "Please, someone let me out," the words no longer felt hopeless. Because maybe, just maybe, the Alpha who had arrived was the answer. The Harrington estate carried its silence like a weapon. Walls too tall for climbing, guards too alert for escape, doors that locked from the outside. 4 years, Elior had walked its halls like a ghost, his footsteps soundless, his words unsaid. But since the day Ronan arrived, something had shifted. The silence no longer felt impenetrable. It hummed now, restless, as though waiting to be broken. 3 mornings after their first meeting, Elior was summoned again. His mother swept into his room without knocking, her voice sharp. "Lord Ronan has requested your company. Do not waste this chance." Her tone was laced with suspicion, as if she could not understand why an Alpha of Ronan's stature would ask for Elior specifically. Elior's own chest tightened. Fear warred with curiosity. Minutes later he was led outside. The air struck him first, fresh and cool, scented with roses and damp earth. His lungs ached at the sudden fullness of it. The sky stretched endless and blue above, and for the first time in months, sunlight kissed his pale skin. He blinked against the brightness, his heart stuttering. Ronan waited near the garden fountain, hands clasped behind his back. He turned as Elior approached, his sharp gaze softening slightly. "You prefer the garden," Ronan said, not a question but a statement recalling Elior's single whispered word. Elior hesitated, then nodded faintly. His fingers curled into the folds of his shirt, nervous. "Walk with me." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Elior followed, tentative at first, his steps small. They walked along the gravel path, roses blooming in shades of crimson and ivory around them. The fountain murmured softly, birds sang in the hedges, and Elior's chest ached with the beauty he had been denied. "You do not often come outside," Ronan remarked after a while. "I'm not allowed," Elior whispered, his voice trembling like fragile glass. Ronan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he slowed his pace, matching Elior's hesitant steps. For the first time, Elior noticed that Ronan's presence did not press down on him the way other alphas had. It steadied him instead, grounding without suffocating. They walked in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence Elior had always known. This one was gentle, like a pause between breaths. At the far end of the path, a butterfly fluttered past, golden wings catching sunlight. Elior's eyes followed it, wide and wistful. Without thinking, he lifted his hand slightly as though reaching. When he realized what he'd done, heat flooded his face. He quickly dropped his hand, ashamed. Ronan's voice was low, calm. "You may reach for it if you want." Elior's throat tightened. "If I want." The word sounded foreign, dangerous. One had never belonged to him. His life was dictated by rules, expectations, commands. Yet here was someone telling him he could reach, simply because he wished it. He swallowed hard, but his hand trembled upward again. The butterfly landed briefly on his fingertip, its wings delicate, weightless. Elior gasped softly, wonder lighting his eyes. When it flew away, his lips curved into the smallest, shyest smile. Ronan saw it. He did not speak, but the corner of his own mouth lifted ever so slightly in return. That evening, Elior's parents pressed Ronan again about contracts, about binding agreements. Ronan listened with his usual stillness, but his answers were vague, evasive. He did not promise, nor did he refuse. His patience unsettled them. When Elior was dismissed to his room, he caught a glimpse of his father's scowl, his mother's narrowed eyes. Suspicion simmered in the air. He sat on his bed, heart racing. For the first time, he wondered if Ronan saw through the Harrington's lies. And if he did, what would that mean for Elior? The days that followed brought more walks. Each time, Ronan asked for Elior's company. Each time, Elior's parents allowed it, believing perhaps that the alpha was evaluating his worth. But those walks were not interrogations. They were freedom. Small, fragile, stolen, but freedom nonetheless. Ronan never pressed too hard, never demanded answers Elior couldn't give. Instead, he asked simple questions. "What books do you like?" Elior hesitated. "Stories about the sea." "Why the sea?" "Because it has no walls," Elior whispered, eyes glinting. Another time. "What do you dream of?" Elior froze. Dreams were dangerous. Dreams meant disappointment. Yet Ronan's steady gaze made him brave. To leave these walls. To be seen. To be free. His voice broke on the last word, but Ronan did not look away. "You will be," the Alpha said quietly. No doubt. No hesitation. A promise woven into the air. Elior stared at him, trembling because no one had ever spoken such words to him, not even in whispers. One afternoon, their walk took them past the servants' quarters. Elior stiffened when he heard raised voices, his father's, sharp with anger. "You think you can make decisions for me, Ronan? This Omega is mine. He will be sold as I see fit." Ronan's reply was calm, but steel threaded his tone. "He is not yours. He is a person, not property." Elior's breath caught. No one had ever dared speak such words in this house. There was a tense pause. Then his father's laugh, harsh and scornful. "Careful, Alpha. Do not mistake softness for strength." "I know the difference well," Ronan said, voice low. "And I do not mistake cruelty for control." Elior's hands shook, his chest heaving. He pressed back against the wall, heart pounding. Someone was standing against his father. For him. For him. That night, Elior could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning. For years he had lived as if his life was not his own. Every decision stolen, every breath dictated. He had convinced himself he was nothing more than a possession. But Ronan had looked at him and seen more. Had spoken of freedom as though it were not impossible. Had defied his father's voice without fear. The chains around Elior's heart trembled, the first cracks appearing. He rose from bed, crossing to the barred window. The moon hung above, silver and vast. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, pale, thin but alive. For the first time he whispered not a plea but a vow. I will be free. The words trembled but they were real. He clutched them to his chest like a weapon, like a prayer. Somewhere in the house he knew Ronan was awake too. Waiting, planning. And Elior, though still caged, felt the weight of his chains growing lighter. Because when the Alpha looked at him he no longer saw only an Omega. He saw a person worth saving. The Harrington estate was tense, like a storm gathering in the air. Servants whispered in corners, avoiding the halls when Lord Harrington's heavy steps echoed. Elior felt it in the walls, in the sharp way his mother's eyes lingered on him, as though they sensed their control slipping thread by thread. That morning the summons came. He was brought to the grand hall, where his parents sat in their gilded chairs like royalty upon thrones. Several guards lined the walls, their presence meant to intimidate. Elior's heart pounded as he stepped inside, hands trembling at his sides. And there was Ronan standing across the room, tall and composed, his presence filling the space. His eyes flicked to Elior briefly, a silent promise before returning to the Harringtons. You have toyed with us long enough, Lord Harrington snapped. We allowed you access to our son, showed you his worth, and still you delay your answer. If you do not intend to finalize the contract, then leave. We have other buyers. Elior flinched. Buyers? The word cut like a blade, stripping him bare of humanity. Ronan's voice was calm, steady, but it carried like thunder. I am not here to purchase Elior. I am here to free him. The room fell silent. Lady Harrington's lips thinned, her eyes sharp. Free him? He is our son. He belongs to us until we decide otherwise. No, Ronan said firmly. He belongs to no one. Elior's breath hitched. His body shook, not from fear this time, but from something dangerously close to hope. Lord Harrington surged to his feet, fists clenched. You dare come into my house and lecture me on what is mine? Ronan did not flinch. I dare. Because I have seen how you treat him. I have seen the bruises you hide, the silence you forced upon him. This is not guardianship. It is imprisonment. A murmur ran through the guards. Some shifted uneasily, though none moved. Elior's father sneered. You speak boldly, Alpha, but you forget whose house you stand in. Ronan stepped forward, his presence radiating power but not menace. Authority steady and unyielding. And you forget that cages cannot last forever. Elior is not your possession. He is a person, and today he chooses for himself. The words hung heavy in the air. Elior's chest seized. His throat tightened. He had never been asked to choose, never believed he could. His whole life had been dictated, his will chained. And now here was freedom laid bare before him. But fear clawed at him. His parents' eyes burned into him, full of expectation and threat. If he spoke, if he defied them, what would happen? Ronan's gaze found his, calm and steady. You are not alone, it seemed to say. Something inside Elior broke. The silence he had carried for years cracked open, and his voice, shaking, fragile but real, spilled into the hall. I am not your property. Gasps echoed. His father's face twisted with rage. What did you say? Elior's knees trembled, but he forced himself to stand taller, to let the words fall louder. I am not your property. I am not a prize to be sold. I am your son, and you locked me away like I was nothing. But I am not nothing. Tears blurred his vision, but his voice grew stronger with every word. I want to live. I want to see the world beyond these walls. And I will not. His voice broke, then steadied again, fierce. I will not go back into that cage. For the first time in his life, Elior's words filled the hall. Not whispers, not pleas, defiance. Lord Harrington's face turned red with fury. You ungrateful. He lunged forward, hand raised to strike. But Ronan was faster. His arm shot out, seizing Harrington's wrist mid-swing. His voice was ice. Touch him again and you will answer to me. The room froze. The force in Ronan's tone, the authority in his stance, left no room for challenge. Even the guards wavered, uncertain. Lady Harrington's mask of composure cracked, her voice shrill. This is madness. He is weak, he cannot survive without us. Elior's chest heaved. He turned to her, tears streaking his cheeks. No, mother. I was weak because of you. But I will survive, because I finally believe I can. The silence that followed was deafening. His parents' power, once absolute, fractured in the face of his words. Ronan released Lord Harrington's wrist, stepping to Elior's side. He did not touch him, He only stood close, his presence a shield. The choice has been made, he said quietly. Elior walks free. The Harringtons had no reply. Their authority, built on silence and fear, had been broken the moment Elior raised his voice. The gates creaked open for the first time in years. Elior stepped beyond them, the air cool and sharp against his skin. His legs trembled, but his heart soared. Behind him, the house loomed like a shadow of his past. Before him stretched the open road, endless and alive. Ronan walked beside him, steady and patient. He did not lead, he matched Elior's steps. At the crest of the path, Elior stopped. He turned back once, looking at the walls that had caged him for so long. His chest tightened, but then he exhaled, and with that breath he let the cage go. Ronan's voice was low, gentle. You are free now, Elior. What you do with that freedom is yours to decide. I will not bind you unless you choose it. Elior looked at him, eyes wide, lips trembling. No one had ever given him choice before. Not once. His voice shook, but it was his own. I want to stay. With you. Ronan's gaze softened, the faintest smile touching his lips. Then with me you will stay. Elior reached out then, his fingers trembling, and for the first time he touched Ronan's hand, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but choice. The warmth of that hand anchored him, steadied him, set him alight. They walked together beneath the open sky, the road stretching far ahead. The cage was behind him now, nothing but memory. And beside him was the Alpha who had not taken possession of him, but given him back to himself. The Omega who was caged no longer. He was free. And in that freedom he had found love.